All right, so welcome back everyone to the next episode of the Disclosure Podcast. I am your host, Ed, and today I'm joined, and I should say joined again actually, because this is the second take of this attempt. But I'm joined by Jack Harries, is who many of you may remember from JacksGap, the famous YouTube channel. But for those of you who don't know him, and maybe you know him from more recently, his escapades have been in the environmental movement. And so thank you. Welcome back, Jack. It's nice to have you in the studio again.
Environmental escapades. I like being here. I'll come back as many times as you like.
Well, don't hold me to that one, because I'll just turn the gain down. But Jack, for those of you who aren't aware of your work and the things that you are involved in, could you maybe give a little overview of what you do, but also kind of how you got yourself into this environmental movement?
Yeah, sure. I never quite know how to sum it up, but I guess I sort of think of myself as a filmmaker. I started making films on YouTube in 2015 when I was like 18. It just seemed like an exciting place to start sharing short videos I was making. And at the time, they were relatively silly, mundane videos, but it was just like, I'd never had an aim or whatever. It was just a sort of a thing for fun. And that carried me for like 4 or 5 years. I made films on YouTube, and it was an amazing experience. It felt like the world opened up in this strange way, and I got to meet all these amazing people, and was able to travel as well. And I suppose on that journey, something that sort of really changed the course of my life was traveling to Greenland with the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund or Foundation. I never know, and I'm an ambassador for them. I think it's fund is what it officially is. Anyway, they came to my brother and I. We'd been making these films, and they said, how would you like to travel to Greenland? And to be honest, at the time, it was just like, that sounds like an amazing, exciting place to travel to. I'd love to do that. And I knew a little bit about climate change and things like that. My mom was an environmental activist, but really didn't have a proper sense, and so I went on this trip, and it just blew my mind. We spent this night camping on a glacier called the Jakobshavn Glacier, which is one of the fastest retreating in the world. And I suppose it just brought the realities of climate change like right in front of me. Just smacked me in the face. We sort of spent this night camping, and I didn't sleep a wink just with the sound of these huge pieces of ice carving off the front of the glacier, which is, as we now know, one of the main consequences of a rapidly heating planet. And so anyway, that sort of led me onto this path of like, wow, this is going to be a huge thing and probably the most important issue of our lifetime. And so it sort of led me into, I guess, trying to seek out, trying to tell stories from the front lines of climate change. Because one of the issues we can talk about later is the idea, the fact that it's not right in front of us, that it's sort of hard to grasp and to feel and to get a sense of unless you go to these sort of front lines around the world. And so from Greenland I went to Somaliland and did a project there around drought, and then to Kiribati, which is a small island in the Pacific Ocean that's under threat from sea level rise. And so that's sort of been my journey. So I'm a documentary filmmaker, but it sort of led me to become to focus on the environment, and that sort of seeing that has led me also to become an activist, which is a sort of a new thing that I'm sort of getting used to, this term activist and what that means. And been getting myself into all sorts of trouble recently, which we can talk about later.
Yeah, we certainly will. I said to you in the last podcast, and I haven't sent you this video yet, but but I know it's I was going to bring this up.
Last time we were here, you were like, "I'm going to send you this video," and you still haven't. But you should tell everyone what the video is.
So back when I first started my YouTube channel, this was January 2016. I think I made this video in February actually. Jack had just released Our Changing Climate, which is the documentary made of WWF, and I watched it and I was outraged. And I was like, hang on a second, this is like a 15-20 minute documentary, however long it was, about climate change, and there's not been any talk about the causes. And obviously I was like, there's not been any talk about veganism. And so I was like, I'm going to make a response video to this and call them out. In fairness, I will send you the video. I'm not being cowardly about it. I will send it to you because I was like, Jack and Finn seem like really good guys, blah 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 blah. So kind of like,
you weren't just a meanie. You were making a point. Yeah.
I was brown nosing you in case you saw it. No, they're lovely guys, but I was more critical of the WWF. Anyway, I'll send it to you. It's quite funny, but it's almost a bizarre circumstance for me to be able to talk to you now about it, because back then when I had like 15 subscribers and like 10 views per video, I never would have imagined it. So anyway, that's a little bit of a pinch yourself moment for me, but it's quite funny to have you in, but also to have made this video about Our Changing Climate, which is one of the first branches you made into the environmental sector, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so after you made that documentary, and I guess let's maybe jump forward a couple of years, you're doing a lot of work now with Extinction Rebellion, but also kind of on your own promoting environmentalism with your followers and making documentaries as well in that sense. And so what kind of spurred you to take a more, use the word activist, which I think is a very appropriate word. What kind of made you feel compelled to become an activist?
The short answer is just like feeling absolutely terrified for the state of my future,
Yeah.
and for the future of my kids. If I have kids one day, which is a whole other thing, I've had to start questioning of whether I should or shouldn't have kids. And again, maybe we can talk about that later.
Yeah, that's a
But
good point.
just fear is, I really think fear is what drives me on a daily basis, and that fear has come from traveling to these places and understanding the effects of climate change firsthand. And then I've really made an effort to try and educate myself, and I don't think it's an easy thing with climate change. You know, I'll be the first to say I'm not a scientist in any way. In fact, I flunked science through school, and so it's, you know, these facts and data about these sort of big, overwhelming, complicated things that are happening in faraway places, it doesn't come to me naturally. But in an attempt to try and understand this issue, because I got the sense it was a serious issue and one that we should probably understand more, I subscribed to as many environmental newsletters as I could, and you know, there's loads of great ones out there, like the Guardian's Greenlight, Greenpeace's Unearthed, New York Times's what is that called? Anyway, whatever. New York Times have one, Guardian have one, Yale University has one called Environment 360. And I just sort of like put my email into all these, and then every day I would get this flood of emails. And it was a terrible idea, because every day the view of the world from my inbox was terrifying and like apocalyptic. And you had to go to these specific places to get the news. But once you were getting that news, it was like deeply shocking. And so it just started to make me feel more and more afraid. And then I would look around, look at our politicians. Are they doing anything about it? No one's talking about it. I educated myself after making that documentary about plant-based diets and the importance of that, thanks to, you know, people like you doing activist work. And then I'd look to our politics. Is anyone talking about this? No. And I just became increasingly angry and felt that the necessary path was activism, you know, and the only people I saw taking action were these like somewhat extreme groups, you know, or initially to me they seemed extreme, but once you start to really read the science and the facts, it doesn't seem extreme at all.
It's funny how that word extreme is, you know, used so freely, and it's just like the word radical. I've spoken about this in the podcast before, just the idea that the word radical is supposed to have negative connotations, but, you know, challenging anything, any kind of dominant, you know, systematic paradigm, like, you know, fossil fuel usage or whatever, seems radical, because it's not what we're used to, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's interesting how we have these notions of, I used to think vegans were extreme. Yeah. And I probably thought that the environmental movement was quite extreme as well. It's funny how you have those notions, don't you? And then when you realize, oh my God, this is a serious thing, all of a sudden the opposite seems extreme, doesn't it?
I always go back to Al Gore's first film, An Inconvenient Truth. Just that name, I feel like captures this entire crisis so well. And in fact, you know, the way I first came towards plant-based diets and veganism was I watched that film Cowspiracy, which I know turns a lot of people, and like I really remember finishing watching it and my first thought was like, man, this is really inconvenient, because now I'm going to have to go plant-based, and I just sort of wish I hadn't known, you know. And it's the same thing with climate change, you know. It's like it would be nicer not to know, but once you know, you can't really go back, and it starts to change the entire way you look at everything around you.
Yeah, they say that ignorance is bliss, don't they? I had the same thing. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's blissful, but, you know, impending doom isn't so blissful, is it? And so I had the same thing with Earthlings, the documentary about animals, and my partner and I were vegetarian, and she was insistent that we watched it, and I knew if we watched it we were going to go vegan. So I was like, no. I think
a lot of people put off that content, and my parents for a long time as well. You know, I was trying to get them to watch Cowspiracy. I know what it's going to be like, and I don't want to watch it. And we're really good at that as humans. We're really good at choosing not to know something if we don't want to. You know, and I think it's probably why we've ended up where we are with the level of the crisis we're at. You know,
willful ignorance, isn't it? It's like you willfully don't want to know, because then you can't be held responsible. It's like, I didn't know that this was happening to our planet, or animals were being, you know, treated in this way, so I'm therefore exempt of any accountability. It's a cheap move.
It's very easy to be that way, especially if you live in a metropolitan city somewhere around the world. It's like it's designed so that you don't have to think about the kind of, it's like there's a big thick curtain that prevents you from seeing a lot of the processes that go into anything, to food, to clothes, to fuel, to products, plastic, you know, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, it sort of feels like what's happening at the moment is people starting to like lift this veil and peek to the other side, and it's sort of terrifying but almost strangely invigorating, because you sort of want to look behind these, you know, everything, and to understand how it's come to be the way it's come to be. And I think our generation is starting to do that. You know, we're starting to see more and more activists, and that's really exciting.
Well, that's interesting you say that. I guess say when you were on YouTube, there wasn't really that much of like an activist-y side to it. Well, maybe I'm wrong, but my impression was it was more kind of lifestyle vlogging, that kind of aspect. But now it seems that a lot more people on YouTube have this appetite for information that is thought-provoking, and that could be political commentary, it could be activism, environmental, vegan. It seems like that seems to be in the young people is an appetite to learn almost, which I think is quite invigorating, but also quite new. And maybe I'm being a bit naive, but that's how it feels.
No, I totally agree. And also like platforms like I don't know how you say it, Kurzgesagt in a nutshell. Do you know that channel?
I'm not sure.
Amazing channel where they take these huge, complicated issues and they create these animations. They're like a team of journalists, animators, writers, scientists, and they just sort of break down these huge, complicated issues. I really recommend it. In a nutshell, you'll find it on YouTube. But also like Vox, who like explain the news, and all these platforms that are sort of set up to inform and educate people, and they do incredibly well. And I think people are really hungry to learn. You know, education has been democratized by the internet in many ways. But I also think a lot of people in our generation are looking for purpose, for a greater sense of purpose. We're all overly provided for in a million different ways, which is lovely, but also leaves you with a bit of a hole of like, what is my purpose? And, you know, what should I be doing here? And I think educating yourself about the issues of the world and then, you know, going some way towards trying to mitigate them offers a sort of purpose that I think a lot of people are hungry for.
I would agree. And I think there seems to be a theme of kind of frustration and anger, I guess, to the systems and the lack of response, you know, environmentally, especially with the school strikes that kind of Greta's founded, which are incredible. And you know, you and I we weren't there together, but we were both at the recent strike in London. And I think for me personally, Luna and I, when we left, I felt so hopeful, more hopeful than I felt in a long time.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. You too. That's good to know.
I literally left sort of just being like, that was amazing. And I have to say, like, I didn't necessarily have high hopes. I worried about it. I'd seen footage of previous ones where some kids were like drinking or something, or climbed on top of a bus, and I was like, this could be really bad if it sort of takes this negative, you know, connotation. And it's like the worst thing that could happen is kids just seem like sort of hooligans, and then politicians can easily be like, these silly kids, get back to school, whatever. Yeah, but on the day that we were both at, it just felt raw and exciting and incredibly organized, and there were so many young people that were so well informed as well. And I just think what's most exciting to me, having sort of been in this like environmental space for the last 4 years, and my mum before that, and many people before that too, you know, it's been like a sort of 20-year plus fight in a way to sort of raise these issues to the mainstream consciousness. The most exciting thing, and many old-time activists will say this, is this youth movement and this sort of like changing narrative that young people can and should hold older generations accountable, because you just can't argue with kids, you know. And I think if young people really got the issues, like I think if they could all sort of just be like injected with the realities of climate change, they would all be out in the streets. I mean, we literally are seeing millions of people out in the streets, and I think that we're going to see change, and it's going to come from the youth. So that gives me a lot of hope. Agreed.
I think one of the easy things for us to do, and I think this is one of the ways that people write off movements like that, is to try and like, you know, and we could do it as vegans. We could say, yeah, but the thing is, most of them. I mean, I saw a couple of them eating McDonald's, and there's that part of me that wants to go up to them.
There's a couple of the kids at school strike.
Yeah, and there's that part of you that's kind of like, this
funny.
Is ridiculous or whatever. Yeah. But at the same time, like, I think we've got to remember, like, it's all a step in the journey. And I think even for those kids eating the McDonald's, yes, it's, you know, it's hypocritical and ironic, but at the same time, that's not the point. You know, they simply don't know. And I think one thing we should be cautious of is to be like vegan, to say, well, most of them aren't vegan, so what's the point? But it's like, they're angry. And then with their anger, they're going to start to look for things that they can do. And I think that's why people that kind of have a voice to be able to influence others to be vegan, it's our responsibility to, well, maybe go to the next school strike with some flyers and give them out, because that's how we generate change, not to say, well, these people are hypocrites. It's like, these people care, let's take that caring and help them. Well, you know, why don't you look at animal agriculture and the foods that you eat, and, you know, don't just blame others, look at yourself as well. I think it's all that step, you know. It's about being angry. That's the first step. I had it before I was vegan. I was angry at the system, and then I realized that I was part of that problem, and then we can take those steps to change. Yeah,
there's a big conversation that happens around environmentalism of like, how should we communicate it? And like, should it be hope or should it be fear? Should it be like, you know, there's an issue, but like, we can tackle this? Or should it be like, there's an issue and like, you should panic? And like Greta Thunberg, you know, famously went to Davos and she stood up and she said something along the lines to all the world leaders, she said, I don't want your sympathy, I don't want your hope, I want you to panic.
Right.
And there's something so powerful about that. And there's a guy called David Wallace Wells who just published this book called The Uninhabitable Earth. And if there's anyone listening that sort of wants to educate themselves more on the realities of climate change, I want to say I'd recommend reading it. I almost wouldn't, because it's such a difficult read. It's so overwhelming. In fact, I ended up having to listen to it because I just couldn't keep picking up the book. But it's really insightful, and it talks about the ways that an increase in temperature will affect our planet, and the multitude of ways that will happen. And David's book, it sort of creates a sense of fear and panic, I think. But I think that's wholly necessary, because that then channels into hope. And I think without that fear or anger or panic, there is no sort of energy. And so I think that has to be the first step of this movement, is feeling that those feelings.
Yeah, Greta said something kind of, I would say, quite iconic with the UN when she was saying, I want you to act like your house is on fire because your house is on fire.
It's great, that house on fire. It's
great, isn't it? And she did another thing in a TEDx talk that she did. And I think it was something like, this is, she was at the end of the talk and she's like, this is the bit where, and everyone says something hopeful to make you feel really empowered and positive, but I'm not going to do that. And I was like, damn.
Greta's amazing. I mean, I'm sure most people have heard of Greta by now. She's sort of like a household name, but one of the things some people don't seem to know is that she has Asperger's, and she claims this is, well, it is a big reason for the way she's able just to see in such a black and white way, and it's incredibly refreshing. And even in interviews and things, she doesn't rise to these sort of emotional aspects. She just sees things very objectively as they are. And she's really powerful. She's a sort of pulsating heart of the movement, sort of 16-year-old girl.
I would agree. And what I like about her is that she lives by the principles she preaches. Yes. She doesn't just pay lip service. She is vegan. She doesn't fly. These things that we can all be held accountable for. And so I guess that if we could move in that direction and say, I'm so pleased that someone like Greta is embodiment of what we can do as individuals rather than just, leading a movement asking for change. She's symbolizing that change as well. And so this is, I guess, a challenging question in the sense of when we talk about the environment, is there such thing as a meat-eating environmentalist?
Well, this brings up a sort of whole other question of hypocrisy, and I think like one of the biggest things that holds people back from talking about the environment or from engaging in it is this fear of hypocrisy. And it's totally understandable because we are all absolutely complacent within this argument, within this issue, and it's something that I've started to get a lot online because I've spent the last few years traveling a fair bit to make these films, and people, and rightly so, will be like, how can you talk about the environment and yet still fly and add to carbon emissions? And whilst people are right to point that out, I think that we have to collectively move past this sort of hypocrisy and finger pointing, because everyone is complacent in it. And if you have to be a sort of perfect environmentalist in order to talk about these issues, then no one can talk about the issues, and we're not going to get anywhere, And I also think that whilst people need to make changes in our individual lives, and that's a hugely important thing, there's also a lot to be said for the sort of 1% of people who are making a lot of money off the destruction of our planet, who are causing far greater devastation than sort of individuals, and they need to be held accountable. And that's quite liberating in a way, because I think one of the things, when you talk to people about climate change, is that they feel defensive. I don't want to change my lifestyle. And it's like, well, yeah, there are changes we should all make, like adopting a plant-based diet, flying less, all these sorts of things. But also, it's okay just to be angry at these huge corporations like fossil fuel companies who literally invest billions in disinformation campaigns, just in confusing the public in order to further their sort of profits and corporate greed. And so I think that's one way people can sort of channel their energy. But you asked me about can you be a meat-eating environmentalist?
Right.
And so
let's say a non-vegan environmentalist.
A non-vegan environmentalist. Well, there's a few different ways to answer this. I mean, we know that the agriculture industry is one of the leading causes of climate change. 1.3 billion cows take up 23% of the landmass on Earth. The methane they produce is a major contributor to global warming. Also one of the foremost polluters of land, air and water. So if you want to help the environment, adopting a plant-based diet is the single biggest thing you can do to cut down your carbon emissions. So the simple answer is sort of no. If you want to fight for the environment, you can't really eat meat. But then it brings up the question of what does it mean to be an environmentalist? And this is something I wanted to ask you, because when we last did this, you said, and it really stuck with me, you said, I wouldn't call myself an environmentalist, not yet. Or something. You said something along those lines. I wouldn't be confident calling myself an environmentalist.
Yes. I
want to ask you why.
That's a good question. I don't know, that's an interesting thing. And I guess it is that, well, I speak about the environment, and in this year, last year I was kind of always a sideline. This year I feel like more out of coincidence than purposefulness. It's become quite a big topic in a lot of the TV stuff I've done and in general conversation. I feel, maybe it's because in my head I still have this separation between veganism and environmentalism, and I don't want people to think that because I'm talking about the environment, I'm somehow trying to distance myself from the animal rights aspect. And first and foremost, it's for the animals, and then secondly for the environment. Although, in my head, the environment it's the biggest thing because it affects the animals as well.
Right.
So it's kind of, you can't really be for animal rights and negate the environmental aspects of it. And so I think it's just because I'm not fully adopting everything that I can do for the environment.
Right.
And I think that being vegan wasn't for the environment, so I can't say, well, I'm, if that makes sense, I feel like it's a bit hypocritical of me. And so, you know, I'm looking very much at how I travel now. You know, going to America for a month, you know, and I could fly to all the places, but I'm going to get trains there. You know, good old Greta's made me feel nice and guilty about that. So that's thanks to Greta.
Us all accountable.
She's holding me accountable, exactly, which is, you know, I'm very grateful for that. So I think when I've implemented these steps and I don't just talk about them, I'll say, you know, I am an environmentalist. But I think for now it's just, I don't want to talk a good game. I don't want to fall into that trap of talking a good game but not living by it, which is what I'm really critical of other people, you know.
Right. And it's a complicated thing because, so like the dictionary definition of an environmentalist is something along the lines of someone who has a concern for protecting the planet. And so like my case is like I would argue that every single person on the planet is an environmentalist in the sense that we must all be interested in the protection of the environment to some degree because we rely on it, because it is us. It's almost like asking, are you interested in the protection of your own body? Well, yeah, just in the fact that you have to be to survive. I mean, we have to protect the environment to survive, right? It's just in everyone's interest. And so instinctively, we're all interested in the protected environment. We don't necessarily all act on it.
Right.
But I don't know whether that determines you're an environmentalist or not. It's the same as like, I don't know, would you call yourself a feminist? I would call myself a feminist. I don't necessarily attend protests or marches necessarily, but I would call myself feminist because I believe in equality, and to me that's what it means to be a feminist. So if you believe in the protection of the environment, wouldn't you call yourself an environmentalist? I suppose the argument against it is that unlike feminism, on a daily basis you feel the conflicts, like you say, like getting on a plane and stuff, whereas you probably wouldn't call yourself feminist and abuse women or you know, do whatever the equivalent would be.
Yes, that's true actually. I think that's I like that little bit of devil's advocate of yourself. Yeah. It's kind of true, isn't it? I think I think it would be a stretch to call yourself an environmentalist but then not take any active steps to help the environment. It's a tricky one, isn't it?
The point I'm making is that I wish people were able to feel more okay with the idea of being an environmentalist without having to be a perfect human. I wish it was more normalized, because otherwise it's totally unobtainable. And like we need environmentalism to become cool. You know, we need kids to sort of think of themselves as environmentalists and want to be environmentalists and sort of aspire to do that if we're to like have any shot of
But we've also got to hold people accountable. The risk of being like, oh, we don't want to alienate people by setting like rules for what a good environmentalist looks like means that we just have this kind of open policy that anyone can label themselves as such but not do anything. And so this is, I guess, will lead on to where I think one of the big topics of conversation is the role of environmental leaders in actively advocating for specific things. And so the risk of just having like a very, you know, free policy about how you can refer to yourself is that it kind of removes that aspect of accountability, and we should hold our governments accountable 100%. I would not for a second say we shouldn't do that, but we also need to hold each other accountable. And for me, I feel there's a certain irony at pointing the finger at, you know, the 1% who undoubtedly do the most damage as a grouping, but without looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying, well, how do I contribute to this problem? Because if I was in the 1% and there were people like protesting against oil, say I work for Shell Oil and there are people protesting against fossil fuel usage, I'd be like, every single day you use fossil fuels, you should be thanking us. And that's not fair because people don't have the alternatives. But at the same time, if we're not trying in our lives, why would we expect them to take us seriously, I guess is...
Yeah, of course you're right. Of course. I guess it's about a bit of both, right? You have to attempt to make the changes, you know, within what's reasonably possible within your own life. And then you should also advocate for governments and corporations to set the precedent. I mean, one of my first protests with Extinction Rebellion was in London last year outside Downing Street, and we were there sort of protesting around climate change. And then the guard or the policeman who was sort of protecting Downing Street asked us all to move off the side of the road so that a van could come through, and the van was delivering premium meats to Downing Street. And it's this sense of like, well, that feels frustrating because I've adopted a plant-based diet because I feel like that's what's necessary for our environment, yet our Prime Minister is still gorging on premium meats. And so like, yes, there has to be change in personal life, but also the precedent has to be set by those in power and those who lead us. And I feel like that really isn't happening at the moment. And so yeah, we sort of demand change of each other, but also, you know, from the governments and that 1%.
Agreed. And yes, absolutely. I think that accountability has to be shared. And so I guess the question is, say our government adopts like the Paris Climate Agreement, right? And, you know, we start to cut down our carbon emissions. I mean, maybe you know a bit more about this than I do, but even if we fell in line with that, it still wouldn't be enough, would it? Or would it?
What is enough? I mean, it's like a
Wow,
sort of
that's a great question. Isn't it?
it's like a nebulous thing, but yeah, I mean, the way it works with the Paris Agreement is that the Paris Accord essentially meant that anyone who signed up, which was a majority of the countries around the world, Trump famously pulled out a year or two ago, meant that we agreed to not let the temperature rise to more than 1.5 degrees, right? So burning fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases, which is trapping hot air, causing the Earth's temperature to rise. And that's happening. It's like climate change is here, global warming's here. It's not like, will it happen, won't it happen? No, it's here and it's happening. What scientists are now debating is how much the temperature can increase by and how that will affect the planet in different ways. And like the difference between, for example, a 1.5 degrees increase, and this is since pre-industrial levels, right? So we're currently at 1 degree increase from pre-industrial levels. And so the difference between 1.5 and 2 is drastic. Like 2 degrees, 2/3 more people die, 2/3 more ecosystems are affected, 2/3 more of the economy is affected. There's 10 meters more sea level rise at 2 degrees versus 1.5 degrees, which doesn't sound like much, but you're literally, that's like hundreds more cities going underwater, right? So that's what's being debated at the moment, is like, what is the safest amount of temperature increase that we can live within? And we agreed 1.5, and our government and many governments around the world simply aren't in line with that at all. And so at the moment we're headed for like a 3 degrees rise, and which will mean the sort of Sahel region, the sort of regions around the equator, will be just unlivable for many people. And just not like go off on a whole total tangent, but the other thing is, I think people think about climate change in very simple terms of like, oh, ice caps melting or sea levels rising, but there's many more like minute issues that are going to become part of climate change. Like think, for example, when people living in the Sahel region in that middle part of Africa can't grow crops anymore, then you're looking at mass migration, and we've already seen from like the Syria crisis, how badly we've handled a migration of 1 or 2 million people. The UN predicts 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. Wow. It just changes the way the entire world is going to work, and will put immense amount of pressure on our infrastructure in a million different ways. So that was a really long answer to the question you asked.
But this is really important. I think this is why this isn't talked about enough either. And it's like, you've got 1 billion people displaced who are going to be moving to colder climates. So they're going to be moving north into Europe, right, North America, so Canada. So we have more people in a more contained space. We also have fewer resources.
Right.
So we're gonna have wars over water, which sounds outrageous because you just go to the tap now and get fresh water. But in the future, these luxuries aren't going to exist. I mean, this is what annoys me about this is, I don't. When are people are going to? How many studies does it take? How much more does there need to be for people to say, "Oh my God, like, okay, the house is on fire, right? Let's act like this and do absolutely everything." But I don't know if there's a sense of apathy. Maybe it's that fear. It's like, you've got like those fight-flight responses, but you also have something called a freeze response. And those are the people you see in movies who are so shocked they just stand still and don't react. Like, it feels like we're in that moment where we're already scared, and so we're just going to freeze and just, not do anything about it, not even going to try. And what will it take? Wars over water, displacement. We're going to have... And you know what's going to happen? It's just going to fuel far-right nationalism, populism. We're going to close off our borders.
And we're seeing that happening already
all
around the world.
It's like a preemptive political movement, isn't it? Where people closing those borders because come 2050, in our lifetimes, where we're still going to be hopefully quite sprightly, there's going to be these huge issues, isn't there?
That's why I ask, what will it take? And actually this sort of segues into another thing we spoke about the last time we recorded this, which is Extinction Rebellion, which is this sort of activist group. And maybe I'll sort of explain what it is very briefly, but then I also sort of want to gauge your views in it, because I know you didn't necessarily sort of associate with Extinction Rebellion. Anyway, I'm sort of curious to learn more about that. But Extinction Rebellion is this group that started in the UK like 6-7 months ago. It's relatively new, and it's a bunch of everyday people really who are afraid about the effects of climate change: teachers, lawyers, people from all walks of life, but also various activists have been doing this for a long time, and they formed this group, Extinction Rebellion, and their main aim is to use mass peaceful civil disobedience in order to create change around climate change. And so last year they shut down 5 of the biggest bridges in central London, and I was arrested with them a few weeks ago as well on another action we've done. And Roger Hallam, the guy who's sort of one of the founders of it, believes that getting as many people arrested as possible is the way to make change. But a lot of people also disagree with Extinction Rebellion's tactics. I mean, in one case, the name sounds quite extreme and sort of aggressive, and also their actions involve, interrupting people going about their daily commute and things. So, what's your what is? I don't really know. What is your take on Extinction Rebellion? Do you think it's interesting, exciting? Support it? Don't support it?
I think first of all, I really love the name Extinction Rebellion.
Okay.
I think it's a fantastic name. I think it's powerful. It really reinforces what's at stake. Everything.
Rebelling against extinction. Yeah.
I think the name's really cool, and I think the branding's really cool. Like the logo and the way they've branded it, I think is really cool. And so I don't really have an issue with the actions. I think if we look at other social justice movements, civil disobedience was a real key player. If we look at, the suffragettes and civil rights, the moments that we remember most, clearly, well, not remember, but that we were taught is, when people of color went into, white-only spaces, but the kind of the segregated spaces and sat there or occupied space on buses, and the suffragettes as well. It was like they chained themselves to to places. That's kind of what we kind of herald as like the defining features of those movements that brought about change, and so. For me, environmentalism, animal rights and veganism, I think, is separate because it's a consumer-driven industry, so we can change things from a consumer level. But how we treat others and from like a psychological perspective is quite different. And environmentalism, I think, is more linked in with, although a lot of it's consumer-driven as well as, of course, what we buy. But the mindsets as well, I think that direct action is really profound. And so I think that shutting down the bridges is a cool idea. I think what you did when you allegedly did what you did to get arrested, I think that was a really, really cool thing. Like that kind of that civil disobedience, so to speak. I think it was a really great thing as well. And so I'm for it, but at the same time, it frustrates me. I've been thinking about this a lot. So what annoys me about Extinction Rebellion is just the finger pointing aspect of it. And I feel, and part of the problem is when you shut down these bridges, all the government has to do, all Theresa May has to do is nothing, right? Nothing. And I guess that's the point, is you build it up to a point where she has to do something.
Right.
But at the same time, there's all these actions and all these people being congregated together and consolidated in this really amazing movement. And then, like, I don't see the tangibility of change occurring. And maybe that's just because it's so early. So in the shutting down the bridges, it annoys people, it frustrates them, and I don't use that as an excuse to not do it. I just think it's more of an indictment of our species that annoys us rather than the real core issue. And so part of me from the beginning of Extinction Rebellion has been like, they don't tell their members, and they're not members. It's a not a membership, but so to speak, they're members. What they should do in their day-to-day life. And so, like we were saying earlier about the kids and the climate strike having McDonald's, there's probably many Extinction Rebellion members that have McDonald's, and so that's what's annoying me. But then I play devil's advocate with myself, and I say, well, there's still only 7 months as like a known organisation, and so they need to build a core audience. And if you start going, you have to be this, you should be this, all of a sudden people are going to be a little more alienated. And I have this with Greta, where I've been like, she needs to be more outspoken about veganism, and that's unfair because she has spoken about it. But also her Instagram, for example, is absolutely soaring at the moment, and she's soaring on that kind of idea of just being a really interesting environmentalist. And so what I'm hoping will happen is that as the seriousness this progresses, then these other, like, okay, we believe this is how you should live. This look at the science here, look at the science there, and then they'll start implementing change. But that's my problem. 11 and a half years according to the IPCC report till we hit.
Yeah. To change. Yeah.
Do we have time to be like, treading over really important issues for fear of upsetting people? And that's what it feels a little bit is happening with Extinction Rebellion, where
you're probably right in that. And it's easier, isn't it, to point the finger at the government, the big kind of system that wants us all to suffer, and not actually to look at yourself and to make change yourself, or to tell each other to make changes.
Yes.
And so I suppose maybe they are taking an easier way out there. Yeah.
That's what annoys me. Like, as you say, anyone can get behind pointing the finger at the big bad guy, like it's Shell, ExxonMobil, and it is, don't get me wrong, and our government should be held responsible. But I think it's just a safe thing, to just point the finger and blame everyone else apart from literally everyone else, the group. It is the 1%'s fault, but if the 99% changed, then, well, that would bring about huge amounts of positive empowerment as well.
What do you think? We talked a little bit about it last time. What do you think about things like meat taxes or carbon tax, which would be a potential initiative that the government could do to encourage more people to either eat less meat or use less fossil fuels?
I was going to ask you this question.
You're going to ask me that.
Okay, this is my views, and I'll be interested to know what you think. I think a carbon tax and a meat tax are inevitable. I think a carbon tax more than a meat tax should happen. My worry is if we looked at what happened in France, in Paris, with the gilets jaunes, that's probably not correct, the yellow vests, right? Is that it was bigger than that. It was about, the Macron and just how the class system works in France. But anyway, it started over the green fuel tax, right? And I found that really frustrating. It was like, here's a tax that's supposed to help the environment, and it literally ends up in some of the worst riots that have ever happened. In a Western European.
And I think that's something we're going to see more of as well. If these taxes start to be brought in, or people are just expected to change their life in all these different ways, that people are going to protest against it. And
how do we implement positive change from a government level? We're asking the government to do something, and so they might say, okay, we want to bring down our CO2 emissions, so here's a carbon tax, and people go, no, we don't want that. We want you to I don't know, invest money in renewable energy. And the government goes, okay, but we need money to do that, so the carbon tax can be used for renewable energy.
Right.
And all of a sudden that seems a little bit less great for people, because that's coming out of their pocket, and then we feel, this is a class problem.
You asked me about this last time I was here, and actually I felt like I wasn't really prepared to answer it, as I hadn't really thought it through properly. So then, since I have come back, I did some research into it, and it's actually a really interesting thing to look at. And I think the carbon tax is probably, as you say, the most likely that we're going to see soon. But in a way, it's almost harder to justify. When I was looking into the idea of a meat tax, that's quite interesting, because the government already tax things that are bad for our health. If you look at meat, the unhealthy aspects of meat, right? There's 3 reasons why people would adopt a plant-based diet normally. One is ethics, one is environment, and the other is health. And health is sort of the one we talk about less in a way, but we know that meat is a carcinogenic. Is that right?
Yeah.
And it's bad for our health in a multitude of ways. And so the government, they already tax certain foods like sugar, tobacco, alcohol. And so it sort of would make sense that they would tax meat as well. And one of the interesting things I read was that taxpayers already pay for the healthcare that has to go towards people, in part because they eat meat, and that creates diabetes and all these other health implications. And so taxpayers are already paying for it. So it doesn't seem like that crazy that there would be a meat tax. And then, what if that tax was then used to make the price of vegetables cheaper or something? Like why is a chicken nugget cheaper than an apple? It makes no sense to me. But
that's right. Wow. Well, I'd not considered that. That ties in with something that I'd watched. It was a documentary called The End of Meat, and there was a bit in there where there was a study. It was an Oxford study. I quite like my Oxford environmental studies. I've cited a few, but this was a different one. And it looks at I think this could be wrong, but I think this is right. If the world was on a plant-based diet, we would save something like $8 trillion in healthcare. And so you're absolutely right. No, that might be wrong. It might be 8 million lives would be saved. Anyway, we save a lot of money, trillions of dollars, I think it was, on healthcare. And so you're right, actually. We, as taxpayers, give money to the, we live in a nationalized healthcare system. And so that's right. I guess the issue would be that it would be different, but the government wouldn't tax us less. They wouldn't bring income tax down because we're paying a meat tax.
Yes, true.
So yes, in principle, yes.
Maybe they could, though, if healthcare costs suddenly shot down, we would get a rebate and we could actually make some money off that.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? But yeah, but that is true. I mean, what we know is that our NHS is severely unfunded anyway, or unfunded, or lack of funds. So that underfunded. That's the one. And so yeah, it would definitely help our healthcare system dramatically. That's a really interesting point, actually. I'd not really considered the taxation of unhealthy products to begin with.
No, and I have to admit, I hadn't even thought about it until you rightly sort of questioned me on it. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to look at. And then carbon tax, I mean, what you rightly brought up was, won't that just make society even more unequal, in that the sort of the haves will be able to, versus the have-nots will be able to sort of, just use all the fuel they want and eat all the meat they want, and the people who already struggle, it will just become even harder. And so I suppose somehow the money has to be used to, make the system fairer.
That's true. I guess if there was a carbon tax and that money was put into renewable energy, then I think in this country people will get behind it. I can't speak. I think France is a little bit. I think culturally France is different. I think here we're a little bit more like, okay. I think we'd get behind that without rioting. Fingers crossed we would. But it is an interesting idea, isn't it? And what upsets me is it is like, the 1% get away again. They're not the ones being punished financially, and they're not the ones having to pick up for what the problem for what they've, what big oil and animal agriculture, all these big players have caused. They're the problem, and consumers are the problem as well. But what they create is the problem, and again, the taxpayers having to get them out of jail.
Yeah.
And it just annoys me that we've got to this point. But I think a meat tax would have a huge effect beneficially. I think it would be an amazing step. But would people be ready for it?
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know how you prevent protests like we've seen with the yellow vests in France. And I think that's another scary aspect of all of this, is like, as our society has to be changed in these huge and drastic ways, you know, there's going to be uprisings in a variety of different ways as well. And so,
but it is education, and so I guess I think these things are inevitable. A carbon tax and a meat tax are inevitable, and so it's our job, until they get to the point where they happen, to create an environment where they become palatable. I think if we did have a meat tax now, I don't think. I think we need it, but I don't think socially we're ready for it.
Right.
But maybe in a year and a half's time, if you know, we all push really hard to get like people's minds in the gear ready for it and just talk about it. Because I think that's the issue, isn't it? When it's talked about, people kind of accept it because they hear about it, and then it's not extreme. So
it's thrust upon someone, and then we get defensive. And
exactly.
Yeah, and education, just in the sense that, I mean, I just really think that none of us really understand the severity of the crisis at hand. And you know, if you understand that, then suddenly none of this seems so extreme anymore. You know, like, I mean, we're talking about these things saving lives. You know, less fossil fuels are going to save billions of lives, you know, and probably not our own as well. You know, it will be the people who suffer the most at the hands of climate change are those who've done the least to cause it. And so, you know, we're a wealthy Western nation, and we've benefited from this sort of use of fossil fuels. And I feel like we have a responsibility, you know, at least at this point, to like try and limit any further damage to the sort of developing world, to the countries who have just pulled themselves out of poverty and are going to be thrown straight back into poverty with the effects of climate change. It's like a horrible, horrible irony in a strange way.
It is. And the interesting thing you touched upon then was like, it is those who are most impoverished who are they're suffering already. We look at the cyclones and like flash floods in Iran, I think there were, or something like. It's already happening, but it's not tangible to us because we don't feel that thing. And I think another issue we have is we point the finger and we say, well, you know, people are overpopulating. India is like 1 billion people, and we think that that's the issue. And don't get me wrong, it's a big issue. But I think I saw a statistic, and it was like, it takes is the term Malawians from Malawi? Malawians?
Let's roll with that.
Let's roll with it.
Sounds like it works.
Sounds good. So let's say it takes, I think it's like 50 Malawians to kind of equal the same amount of environmental degradation that one Western person has.
Right.
And so if we point the finger and say, yes, but populations are rising in these countries, it's like, yeah, but they're the ones not causing the damage. They're suffering from it. So I think how many children we have should be looked at. I think it's vastly responsible for like the Catholic Church, for example, to not be talking about using contraception, and there is, and like in America when there's money being put into like abstinence sex education. Well, no, let's be honest, and there needs to be more education in schools about the impact of children, about how we can safeguard our future in that way as well.
Yeah, hugely, and I think like that's probably the very unspoken about thing in all these conversations is like population increase, and like I suppose you could just put down most of the issues we're facing today as a result of an overpopulated planet. Although, you know, I was talking to David Wallace-Wells. I had this chance to speak to him the other day at an event, and he was saying like that our planet can very much support up to 9 or 10 billion people. And I think this is the bigger problem with climate change, is like we have the technologies, we have the solutions, the scientists are sounding the alarms, and it's not even like, oh, we need to scrabble to figure out solutions. They're all there. It's just that they're not being implemented, and that's because the people who make a lot of money and have a lot of power, you know, in the way that the system's currently run. And so it's about changing the systems. It's all there. You know, it is possible to support a more populated planet.
Yes.
But often you see in like lists of the sort of top things we can do about climate change, is a big part of that is just educating women and family planning in the developing world, and that is a hugely important thing. I mean, I wonder whether we'll ever see like a global one-child policy. Like, I suppose it would just be impossible. What would you think about that? What would be your views on that?
I think I'm somewhat hesitant by government intervention.
Right.
I think a lot of really negative things that have happened in the world have come about from like what you classify as good intentions. You know, sometimes the good intentions? I don't know. There's a saying about good intentions, and so I think that the bottom line is we have to the government shouldn't mandate something that the people haven't already accepted as being true. I think it was in China, wasn't it? And then also if you have like a somewhat unjust society where one type of person has some higher value. In China we saw this with the men and boys and girls, where the girls were put in like orphanages or adoption centers. So I think while the society is so fluctuating in terms of equality, it's a dangerous thing. But it's interesting. I think it should be advised. That's it. I think it should be advised that we look, because if you have two people and they have one baby, that's an okay ratio,
Right.
But again, at the same time, is it enough? And what I was going to say is it's interesting that we do have this idea of we can absolutely sustain 10 billion people on this planet, but only if we change how we eat and how we use land.
Yes.
Was it 45% of the Earth's total land, or ice-free land, is for agriculture, 83% of which is farm for animals. So yes, we can easily support 10 billion people, but only if we become plant-based and vegan. That's the only way. And so population isn't the biggest issue. It always comes back to what we eat is the biggest issue. And then if we fall in line with a plant-based diet, then all of a sudden population can be addressed, and all these other issues can be addressed. But without that top thing, none of these it's all going to fail.
And it's a great point to bring up. And there are other things that will be helped by the changing of a diet. I mean, the thing that a lot of people don't think about is the amount of land usage that goes into having a meat-based diet. And it's an incredibly inefficient way to feed ourselves, because we're growing all this grain to feed to animals to then feed to ourselves, when you could just feed people that food in the first place. It's a totally inefficient thing. But actually we talked about this a little bit last time, but you look at the UK, for example. I think 1% of the land in the UK is a natural nature reserve, is reserved for nature, essentially, right? And like that really surprises me, because when I sort of shoot out of London on a train or whatever, you look around, there's like fields everywhere. But this isn't wild land, this is farmed land, and often to rear animals and to sort of feed the agricultural systems. And if everyone in the UK, let's just take the UK for example, if everyone in the UK adopts a plant-based diet, we'd be able to free up a ton of land, right? A ton of land that's used for rearing animals. And then you ask yourself, well, what would you do with that land? If you let that land rewild, if you just let it go wild again, these amazing things grow called trees. And what these trees do is they suck carbon out of the atmosphere and they turn it back into oxygen. And the very problem at the heart of global warming is an excess of carbon in the atmosphere. And so we have these amazing natural carbon sucking machines. And we're currently designing these gigantic machines that will suck carbon out of the atmosphere, which will be a big part of the solutions that are implemented for global warming. But that would be a really great place to start, is just like plant more trees. And we can do that if we free up all this land. And it's interesting, you look at the farming industries, and like it's massively subsidized by our government. It isn't a profit-making industry. It's cheap because it's subsidized. And so could we not subsidize planting trees or something? I mean, like why? It doesn't have to be profit-making either if we subsidize animal rearing.
Yeah, I mean that's it, isn't it? It seems so obvious, but it's like, oh, that's a genius idea. It's like, well, yeah, it is, but it's also common sense as well. And the thing about rewilding is it's such a simple idea in general, right? It's just, as you say, what's amazing about trees is they do the one thing that we need them to do. It's kind of hilarious, really, isn't it? That we have this solution and we're destroying the solution to clear land for like the problem. I mean, it's just that's humans in a nutshell, isn't it? Something good destroyed for something bad.
That's it.
And the thing about if we went vegan is, did you say methane or methane, by the way?
I say methane.
Me too, but people say methane. I'm going to say methane. That's what I've always said.
Tomato.
Exactly. So, and the thing about methane is, if we look at it, I think it has like a 9-year lifespan or something.
Oh yeah, I didn't know.
So if we all stopped eating animals, we took all the cows and all the sheep and all the ruminant animals out of the equation. Actually, the methane that they're releasing now, by the time we get to say this 11-year IPCC mark, that would not be a problem anymore. I think carbon dioxide sticks around longer, and I think nitrous oxide potentially longer as well. Though I'm not 100% sure on that, but the life cycles of these gases is different, and so methane is a lot worse for the environment than carbon dioxide. But the good thing is we can get rid of it quicker.
Right.
So if we just all went vegan today like that, that would be we would cease to be a problem quite quickly, which is reassuring. But rewilding in a sense is wonderful. And I was been thinking about this today and yesterday. It kind of sprung to my mind. An argument that I hear sometimes from farmers, and I've heard this before, is there is like grazing cows is amazing for the environment because they can't produce more methane than is absorbed. It's something like it's the best thing for the land.
Right.
And I was thinking about this, and I really want to talk to a farmer about this, because the question I want to say to them is, do you think then the best thing for the environment would be to destroy all forests and have cows grazing on them? Because that's the principle, isn't it? If there's either one or the other is better. It's either better to have trees or better to have animals, and if it's better to have animals, then surely you're advocating to clear all the trees.
Right. Yeah.
Seems mad.
There is an argument that some that I've seen made that we do need animals to some degree to roam the land, to sort of, I don't know, eat the grass or whatever it's animals do. And like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I've got no problem with there being animals. It just doesn't mean you then have to kill them and eat them. You know, like, it'd be great if there were wild animals. And actually, George Monbiot, who's one of my favourite writers, he writes for The Guardian, he talks a lot about rewilding. In fact, he wrote a great book called Feral, which I'd really recommend anyone to read, where he sort of, just imagines what it'd be like if we lived in a wilder Britain. But he also talks about the fact that scientists have found parts of trees and things that suggest that elephants once walked across the United Kingdom, and like all these amazing megafauna, and so it's just amazing to imagine what it would look like if we lived in a wilder country, and it's like these carbon sucking machines. Not only would they be sucking carbon, but it would also just make a beautiful environment. I mean, who wouldn't want more forest and more beautiful wild land to go for walks that we could enjoy? It's much more interesting than a field full of cows.
It is, and I think one of the things people don't always understand is like, well, why does my consumption of animal products, what's that doing for biodiversity? Why is that causing species extinction? But imagine, like, it's because we're destroying these habitats, and if we rewild these places and let the natural habitats restore, the abundance of wildlife that has come as a consequence of that would be so wonderful. And then we could reintroduce natural predators again, and create a more harmonious food chain system, which would just be wonderful for all involved.
Exactly. And George talks a lot about this, and there's a study, I can't remember the story that well, but there was a study done in the Yellowstone National Park, and it was essentially that the wolves had become extinct, I think, from that particular area, and as a result that the environment was struggling in a multitude of ways. And so what they decided to, I don't think they realized it was a result, but what they decided to do was bring back the wolf as an experiment. And when they brought it back, the most amazing thing happened, which is the entire ecosystem started to bloom. And science shows us this, that when you take one top predator, it will cause a total cascade in the rest of the ecosystem. And so, a big part of the rewilding campaign that's going on here in the UK is to reintroduce the lynx in Scotland, and maybe wolves and beavers and these various sort of animals.
Ironically, do you know who's opposing that?
Go on.
Animal farmers, because the reason we don't have them is because they eat the livestock.
Of course.
So all the sheep farmers are going, we can't reintroduce these natural predators because they'll eat the animals I need to sell. And it's like, and herein lies the problem.
Right.
You've completely destroyed our ecology.
Right.
And then you want to tell me that grazing animals is the best thing for the environment, or more than having natural animals? Like, it's this is where I get frustrated, because I talk about it and it makes me angry, because I try and be sympathetic and empathetic and be like, okay, I get it, this is their livelihoods, this is all they've ever known. But I'm like, there's a point where intelligence, surely just common sense kicks in. You say, okay, like, I'm opposing this for a selfish reason, but ecologically speaking, it makes complete sense, And I think you can say, oh, well, you're raised in this environment, it's your family have taught you these values, it's all you've ever known, you rely on it to feed your children. But at some point, push comes to shove, and that isn't acceptable,
Sure.
God, where is that line though?
Yeah.
That line between being, I understand, but also being, this is unacceptable.
Yeah, and of course it's a challenging thing. If these are people's livelihoods, as you say, they've been doing it for years and years, and it isn't for us to just sort of project onto them, you need to change. But I think that, in fact, apparently a lot of farmers have read Feral and sort of become fascinated by what he's writing. And so, as we sort of said earlier, I think it's just about gradual education and understanding the issues. And I've seen films like what was it called? 81 cows? No,
73 cows.
73 cows. Yeah. Thanks. There you go. It's my maths brain just doesn't work. 73 cows. Yeah, which was about a farmer who decided to go vegan and give up his entire livestock. And it's a really touching short film. I don't know whether it's online or not, but
I think it's going to be back online the 1st of April.
Okay, yeah, we won a BAFTA, and it's a beautiful film, but it really focuses on how it positively impacted his mental health to stop farming animals. That's sort of what it focuses on, and just because he had felt really uncomfortable farming these animals, it was all that he'd known. His father had given him down the farm, and by giving these animals away, it was sort of a huge relief on him and his own sort of personal well-being. And that's interesting. I'd never even thought about that, about the fact that perhaps farmers maybe do feel a little bit uncomfortable about their practices in some way, and that it could be a better thing for the animals, but also just for the farmer themselves if they adopted these practices. But yeah. there is hope.
But you did mention this before, and it was about tax subsidies, and I think herein lies the root of the problem, isn't it? And I guess this is where holding accountable and lobbying to parliaments is really important. And another level is how we distribute these tax subsidies. You know, and as you said, rightfully so, vast amounts of it are getting into the animal agriculture industry in particular, just to make them turn a profit, because without that they wouldn't. And so you're absolutely right in that. I think, and I know that it happens in America, and I don't know if there is much of a movement here for it, but if we could redistribute those subsidies in a way that's better ecologically, better for the animals, of course, and for us and our health, by subsidizing animal farmers, but to encourage them to become plant farmers, all of a sudden there's significant change, and we could use these subsidies to produce vertical farming environments, and then you solve so many issues with just redistribution of subsidies. But we're so forcefully just giving them to pig farmers and chicken farmers and dairy and all these different farmers, just to continue a failing industry.
Well, there is one golden lining here, one sort of positive thing on the horizon, which is strangely Brexit, which is, and I don't have a deep understanding of this, but from what I can understand, the subsidies come from EU policy, from the EU agricultural policies. And so if that we ever figure out our decision on whether we're going to leave the EU or not, if we do, then there's a chance to rewrite our agricultural laws and to re-understand those subsidies. And so that is one positive aspect of this entire Brexit debate.
Yeah, that's true. I think it was €3 billion a year to UK animal farmers. 3 billion.
Wow.
And so theoretically,
what could you do with that money?
I know. Could you imagine? And so I find like this prospect of a no-deal Brexit, I don't think anyone is, well, there are a few people that want it. I think no one wants it. A good that could come from it is that there's no more tax subsidies from the EU, which will probably happen anyway, even if we leave the European Union with a deal. I mean, it would kind of be somewhat ironic if we left but still took cash handouts from them. It's kind of like having your cake and eating it. So I imagine that they will cease, and that will cause problems, I'm sure, on some level. And I know a lot of farmers voted Remain because of that reason. And so I imagine it is quite a nerve-wracking time for them. And I don't want them to be like scared and nervous. I want them to have an opportunity to change. I don't want them. I don't want them to continue. But I want those. I'd be happy for those subsidies to be given to them if it was given with the provision that they had to change what they were doing. Then I'm happy for that. But it's just currently it's such an unfair system. Again, and then all it does is it causes, as you say, chicken nuggets to be cheaper than fresh fruit. A punnet of strawberries $2.50. You can get 12 chicken nuggets for that price. And so all that destroys our environment. It harms animals and it kills people.
And it's a negative in so many ways.
Exactly. Just stop it. Just let's make that punnet, a packet of punnet of strawberries 50p, and make the chicken nuggets £3. And then all of a sudden you have a fairer society where people are healthier. The animals, there will be a reduction in the amount of animals who are suffering to the point where there's no more animal suffering. And then it's just there in front of us, isn't it?
Right. And I think that's how the general narrative has to change around climate change. Even you have this thing like the Green New Deal, for example, in the United States, and the way that's being positioned is like, let's tackle climate change and create tons of new jobs in the process. And like we're just about getting to that narrative here in the UK as well. And this has got to be the narrative. It's not like everyone stop what you're doing and limit yourselves and never fly and eat horrible boiled vegetables and just live this life because then the environment will be better. That's not what we're talking about at all. We're not talking about saving the environment. We're talking about saving people, and people often forget that, right? Like it isn't an issue with the planet. The planet will be fine. It's a human issue ultimately. And B, like it's a chance to rethink about our systems and how we can have greater quality and live better, healthier, happier lives. And of course that's easier to say and harder to sort of put in policy, but I think that's how we have to view this issue, as like a chance to really rethink some of the things that fundamentally aren't working in our societies.
Yeah, that thing you said was really profound. And Kip Anderson, the guy in Conspiracy, he said this at this event that I was at, and he said, he said we talk about saving the planet. He's like, it's save the humans. Yeah, and I was
really
like, my God,
I know.
That really made me feel something. It made me feel arrogant for saying save the planet, because, as you say, the planet would rather we didn't, but the planet's going to live on. But save the humans. Wow, oh God, that was quite.
There's that other
scary.
On my really darker days, I think like, maybe it would be a good thing, I guess, if the Earth was to flood and to wipe out humans, and then all the water would go into the earth and trees would come up and it would sort of regenerate itself. It's like a natural defense system, and who am I to fight against that? And so then I think maybe I should just make lots of fossil fuel emissions and speed this process up, and it'll be better for
it's dark, but
life.
I was asked this question a few years ago, and the question is if you could push a button and it would, get rid of all humans, we'd just disappear, would you push it? And at the time I went, absolutely not. And the person was like, well, I think that's really selfish of you because, billions of animals are suffering, our wildlife's being destroyed, and our planet's going to die. And I was like, yeah, but I think humans can change, and they're so positive, and we can do so much. And I still think that I think humans are incredible. I don't feel misanthropic as I used to, but at the same time, I'm thinking it is selfish of us to be so greedy and not expect repercussions. And so I have these moments in my head where I'm like, yes, I'd push that button, and then I have moments where I'm like, no, because I think we can change and I believe that we can. But then at the same time, trillions of animals are dying anyway. Take climate out of the equation, say our climate's fine, but we're still killing loads of animals. And so for that reason alone, is it worth it? And then it's just, I find it, and then it's like you slip into this like almost nihilistic perspective.
Yeah, it's a very dark place to get to, and I think you have to just ultimately feel hope and believe in the good of humans and our ability. And like one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is we created the crisis of climate change in one human lifetime, essentially. And actually, I read in David Wallace Wells' book, this is a fact that will blow your mind. We've done more damage to the environment, we've created more carbon emissions since An Inconvenient Truth came out than before. And in other words, we've done more damage to the environment knowingly than we did unconsciously.
My God.
So that's I suppose that's negative. But the point is that it's in one human lifetime that we've created this crisis, and so it can and it has to be in one human lifetime or less than that we tackle these issues. And it is possible. If we can do all of this in one human lifetime, what can we do in another human lifetime? And that's where I start to feel invigorated as a young person with my life ahead of me. And I'm like, together we can really make amazing change. And so
yeah, that's lovely.
It's a more positive.
No, I think that is true. It is like yes, we've done so much damage in such a short space of time. Well, we can change that in a short space of time. I think that's a lovely message. And there are so many productive things happening. And also I think what's important to note is there's so much happening behind the scenes,
yes.
Investment in startup companies and in tech companies. So there is a lot of money in this area, and there's a lot of insight and knowledge. And so actually, I think it happens with veganism as well. I think there's a lot behind the scenes with like plant-based innovation and stuff that we don't know about, and I think that will really change the industry. I think it's the same with the climate. There's a lot happening with people, very intelligent people, thinking of ways to combat this, and so that doesn't mean sit on your laurels and don't do anything, but at the same time I think it means be more optimistic
and also get involved. One of the things I say to any other young people listening is like, I think I've hugely found my sort of sense of purpose in this, and it's like it's the same as the vegan plant-based world, or sort of environmentalism is like, actually it's booming at the moment. And like if you sort of put that set front and center as your purpose, you sort of just meet the most amazing people and find the most amazing companies creating innovations, and like it's just a really great place, I think, to sort of position yourself. An entire world opens up when you start to look in towards veganism or issues to combat ways to combat climate change. So
true. And talking of getting involved, I guess that brings us on to maybe some of the stuff that you've done. I thought maybe we can bring it onto this element of the conversation. So I kind of said earlier about you were involved in an Extinction Rebellion thing where you got arrested, and and so I'd be interested to know like a bit about your experience getting involved, so to speak.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. Well, yeah, and I think I can talk about it quite openly. Last time we spoke, I think it was quite recently after, and I had to sort of be a bit dubious about what I said, but I can be a bit more open now. But it was a couple of weeks ago I got involved in an Extinction Rebellion protest, and basically what it was is we had the what's it called, International Petroleum Week in London, which is a 3-day event in which all the biggest names in the gas and oil industry meet to sort of rub shoulders, get together and discuss future sort of exploration opportunities, essentially. And I'd gone to an Extinction Rebellion sort of press night event where they'd given a talk, and I felt really deeply moved by it. And someone at that event said, look, this thing's happening tomorrow, this Petroleum Week, and we're going to go and do an action. Would you like to come? And at the time I was like, yeah, I'll come and support, but I had zero intention of getting arrested or sort of getting involved in a physical way. And so I went down to this thing, and 8 activists had decided that they were prepared to be arrested. And essentially what they did was they arrived at this hotel in London, and they superglued their hands to the front doors of the hotel. And they sort of, I watched them do this, and there was, as you can imagine, a bit of a commotion with the security guards and things. And in that sort of moment, I felt like, I should help. I should do something. And so in this sort of like moment of enthusiasm, I ran forward and I placed my hand against the glass of this glass door. No glue or anything. I just sort of placed it there, and I was like, I'm just going to sort of stand here in solidarity. And it all sort of like petered down, and it calmed down, and there we were, sort of holding this position. And people started to sing songs, and it was a really like peaceful and quite uplifting environment. Someone actually turned up with a copy of David Wallace Wells' book, and they were reading out lines from it, like 1 billion climate refugees by 2050, and then the activists would loudly in unison repeat these statements so that all of the gas and oil bosses inside could hear, which I think is relatively important.
Yes.
And so there I was doing that, and then the activist next to me realised that my hand wasn't glued, and so he said, "Do you want some glue?" And I'm like, I don't know if I need glue. I mean, I'm fine, my hands. And he's like, no, do you need some glue? And you should try and get the main door to the hotel. The idea was to sort of just create a bit of a disruption so that we could speak to some of the guys coming in, going, again, peacefully, calmly, and just sort of inform them on the facts. And so I just suddenly felt this great sense of like, this is what I'm here for. This is what I need to do. Everything has led up to this one moment. And so when the security guard turned away, I slipped my hand to this guy, and he put a big blodge of, I don't know, super glue or whatever it was, and I made this leap for the main door and sort of stuck my hand against it, and sure enough my hand stuck. And so it was at this point I realised that I'm the worst environmental activist there has ever been. So I sat there, and I was there for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and I really started to need a wee. Was the first thing that happened. And so then I started to have to think, I was like, I never thought about this happening to environmental activists or to any activist. So then I thought, do I either wet myself, or do I pull the skin off my hand? That was the first thing that came to mind. Then it turned out I didn't need to worry about that, because at this point the police had been called, and there was a policeman in front of me just sort of chatting to me and watching, and I realised that my hand was starting to become unstuck, because I actually think it wasn't very good glue,
right? And
it was starting to become unstuck from the glass, and so I'm sort of having to manage needing a wee, and also having to pretend that my hand is actually now still stuck. And eventually I sort of lost focus and moved my hand, and the policeman watching me sort of clocked this and stepped forward and sort of threw some cuffs over my hand. And I was the first one to be arrested, and I felt like I really let the team down when this happened.
That was shoddy glue, wasn't it?
It was shoddy glue, yeah. Probably it was vegan glue. Probably it's very white. So that happened, and then it got even sort of weird, and I was taken down to West End Central Police Station, which is a station in central London, and I was being checked in, and the guy said to me, any dietary requirements? And I sort of like thought about it for a moment. Vegan. And he looked at me like I was just the biggest idiot in the world, like going to a police station asking for a vegan diet. Turned out they did have some beans and potato wedges.
Oh, nice.
And then on top of that, to add insult to injury, there's another cellmate was taken out while I was sort of being checked in. Big guy, and he had bare feet, and I think they take away your shoes and your laces if you're a particularly dangerous cellmate. So I was sort of slightly dubious, and he came up to me and he approached me and said, what are you in here for, mate? And I was quite taken aback, and I was like, activism of some sort. And then I didn't know what to say, so I was like, well, and you, what are you in here for? I didn't know what you meant to say in these sort of exchanges. Yeah. And he goes, I got myself in a right pickle, attempted murder myself, and my eyes just drop to the ground. And it's at this moment I'm like, what have I got myself into? What have I done? And also sort of dawning on me that, like, in taking these actions, you're sort of strangely aligning yourself with like attempted murderers in the eyes of the law, and how surreal and strange this is to be in this position. And anyway, I spent a sort of 13 hours in a cell, and feeling a little bit like hopeless, and sort of thinking that maybe this was a really silly idea. And anyway, so I've had a lot of time to reflect on it since, and I sort of think that like getting arrested probably isn't the best way to go up making your point. Getting caught up in the justice system isn't fun, and it is ultimately just limiting. And so I sort of think going forward, there are other ways to communicate these messages, perhaps without breaking the law. Having said that, it did open up a lot of opportunities to have discussions about the issues.
And one of them was on the Victoria Derbyshire show, which is a show on the BBC, a live broadcast show. And yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that experience? Yeah,
I was invited to go on the Victoria Derbyshire show to talk about the arrest. And I mean, it's one of those classic things. I'm always a bit phobic of like mainstream media and television, because I always feel a total loss of control, I suppose, and this was definitely one of those examples. And a producer called me and said, would you like to talk about it? And Victoria would like to talk to you about the work you've done and stuff. And I don't know, I really wasn't expecting to be attacked. I wasn't expecting to be a sort of negative spin on it, but it was. She went in pretty hard, but at the same time I felt quite confident in the actions that I'd taken and the reasons I'd done them, and so I was quite prepared to have that discussion, and so yeah, we did, and I ended up sharing it online. But one of the things that really surprised me about it was she was essentially defending the government's inaction over climate change. She was sort of saying these are the things they've done, and isn't that enough? And I was so shocked by, like, you can't. I don't know. It's okay to say you shouldn't be arrested, and she was questioning me over wasting police time, and I totally respect that, and that has to be debated. But like, how can you defend the government's inaction of climate change? I mean, no one's arguing that they are in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. They're not. And so I was so shocked that I flipped it on her, which apparently you're not meant to do in television. I said, I mean, what do you think? Do you think they're doing enough? And her response was, oh, well, I'm just a news broadcaster. What does it matter what I think? And it's like, it matters exactly what you think, because you are a well-respected broadcaster in the media, and you're talking to people about these issues. And so that is the very problem, the fact that she doesn't see it as her responsibility to talk honestly and openly about climate change. And then we had a whole debate about whether the government were being dishonest. And I said they weren't being honest. And she said, well, are you saying they're being dishonest? And I said, well, no, they're just not being honest. I mean, to be dishonest, they'd probably have to speak about it, and they're not really speaking about it.
Right.
In fact, I wish I'd made that point. But yeah, it was a bit of a heated interview, but I think I got my point across, and you sent me a very nice message after. And I have to say that when going into it and when I was in it, all I kept thinking about was just channel some Earthling Ed into this, because as I've said to you before so many times, I really admire the way you handle interviews and your ability to keep a calm and clear head, and I think it's so powerful and effective. And I did find myself get very flustered. Luckily they put makeup on me, and so you couldn't see that I sort of was a bit red in the cheeks. But I don't know, do you find that, like, what's your tactics for maintaining a calm and clear head?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's like I want, you know, the importance of us being there can be in these interviews can be diminished by how we act, and it's not just about how you say it, it's the manner in which you say it. And so I think for me it would be like, well, if I can't go on there and keep my cool and remain this way, then I have no right to be there. You know, there'll be someone else who can do it better than that. So I think it's just more of like holding myself accountable and saying, well, if you know, if this is the position I want to be in and I want to accept these opportunities, then I have to prove to myself and to everyone else why I deserve them. I think that's kind of the way I think about it. You know, what's going to help. And you know what, I got quite riled up watching that interview with you. You said about the police wasting time thing. That's the thing that annoyed me the most. I thought, like, what do you mean wasting police time? I mean they're civil servants. That's what we pay them for, first and foremost. And secondly, sure, like, you know, in the grand scheme of things, what's a bigger waste of time, like petty crime or like like an environmental calamity? You know, the criminals are inside that building. The police should be walking in there and arresting them for their crimes against the environment. Exactly. You know, it's a waste of police time. All this other nonsense, and like that really annoyed me, because I thought what it was advocating, what she was kind of subliminally advocating for, was a situation where democratic protest was somehow a taboo. She was trying to say, well, actually, if you exhibit your right in a democratic state to protest freely, then you are wasting police time, and that's a negative. And I thought, wow, what a little insidious remark that is. Like, it's your right as a citizen of this country to protest in the manner that you wish. Right. And it's not her right to tell you that, oh, you're wasting police time. You pay for the police. You paid the police officers' wages who arrested you. You know? Right.
But the point I made to her as well is that you know, I wish it wasn't the case. You know, I have huge respect for the police force, and of course there are many other things they should be managing, like increased knife crime and all these sort of, you know, very serious issues. But like, the only reason we're doing this is because after 20 years of campaigning, nothing's happened, and we are so scared and so desperately feel this is the necessary thing to take. And like, the other thing I said to her was that, you know, I don't want to be doing this. Like, I don't want to be arrested. I don't want to be in this process. And people talk about the youth strikes as well. Someone said to me the other day, oh, it's quite controversial, these kids skipping school, and that makes me really angry. So these kids don't want to skip school. Like, they're doing their A-levels. Who, while the time they're doing their A-levels, thinks, oh, I might just take a day off and like go and tell adults how to do their job? Like, it's shameful that these kids are having to march to do the job that adults should be doing. And I don't think anyone wants to be putting themselves in this situation. And yeah. Anyway.
No activist wants to be doing that. Like when we occupied the pig farm for this Meet the Victims event, we did. No one wanted to be there.
Sure.
We didn't wake up going, oh God, yes, I get to do what I want. It's a Saturday, for God's sake. You know, this is people's days off work. They want to enjoy themselves, spend time with their family, whatever. And instead they find themselves in a pig barn occupying because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And that's the thing, isn't it? People who are
because driven, no one else is doing anything about it.
Exactly.
The people who should be doing something.
I thought that was a valid point that you made. Like, you know, you don't want to be on TV. I don't want to be on TV. I just want whatever a normal life is.
Aspirations like every other young person.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's frustrating, isn't it? Like, but I thought that was I did think you handled that interview really well. I'm trying to think of. I think we've covered quite a lot of bases. And I've enjoyed. I feel like we've done quite a good job of being somewhat open, like logically honest with these issues. And so, I guess moving forward, I think, I'd be interested to know kind of what your future plans are, what kind of are your aspirations. And we talked a little bit about some ideas that you had, and I wondered if you wanted to share any of those ideas on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for offering the opportunity. I think I'll talk about them loosely just because it's so up in the air that I know I'll say something and then instantly regret it because I'll end up changing, the name or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, so where I'm at the moment is like I just think I've been so moved by the youth movement, so inspired by the youth movement, and I just would like to try and create something that maybe harnesses some of that energy, because like as we both said earlier on when we marched that day in London, there is so much raw and amazing energy there, and I think that should be captured into some sort of organization or community that could then use it to really create tangible change. And I'd like to tackle some small but achievable things, that policy changes that could genuinely help improve the environment. So yeah, the sort of big goal is to set up like an environmental organization or community, but I'm trying to figure out exactly what that looks like, feels like, sounds like. And but I mean, I think it would just be like an Instagram account, I think there's a lot of space for that, just for a space where young people can go and kind of put their energy and attention, and also just for like to sort of bridge the gap, the communication gap. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm certainly not a scientist. I don't have all the solutions. I'm not a policy maker, but what I'm passionate about is communication, and I think that there's a big gap between communicating the science. All these incredible scientists are ringing the alarm bells, and I sort of think that's not getting through to the people who should be hearing it, which are the young people whose futures are ultimately going to be affected. And so trying to find some way to like bridge the gap of that communication is my future plan.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, and I think I think what I'm really enjoying about this kind of what's happened in the past year is that people are really starting to take that step in their own life. And I think as vegans, I think what's important is I'm more kind of projecting myself here, and I'm going to say vegan. No, this is about me. This is more of like an inner note to Ed, but like it's just let's be aware of what where people are at, and let's not with the likes of the school strikes and even Extinction Rebellion, let's not push them at arm's length away from us because we deem them to be somewhat hypocritical. Let's be open-minded to the fact that there is something there that's awakening people, and now it's our responsibility to make sure we disseminate that information in a way that's going to be effective. And so I think in the first time we filmed this, I think I was a bit more in the frame of mind of being angry about the environmental movement. I think I was frustrated, but that school strike has really, really changed a lot for me. I don't know. I just feel like a bit in awe of it, and so I feel now that I'm more optimistic, and I don't see them as being hypocrites. I see them as being people on that step to becoming more conscious and more progressive in terms of environmental perspective. And I feel like we will look at these moments and we will look at these organisations and groups as being really pivotal, and it's our job now to push them in the direction of looking at their own actions as well. I think that's such a fantastic final point, and it's just to sort of riff off that. I went to a talk the other night with Christina Figueres, who played a huge part in creating the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I think that was and she, from the UN, and the point she made about sort of talking to people about these issues was meet them where they're at. And I think that's just such a lovely phrase, and it goes for plant-based diets and the greater environmental issues. Like, meet people where they're at, and I really think that's the best way to approach it. It's not about pointing a finger and sort of shaming people. It's about communicating these issues and sort of judging accordingly. So yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a good point to end it. Meet people where they're at. That doesn't mean don't hold people responsible and accountable, but it means get them into that frame of mind for a way that's effective, rather than just you're a hypocrite because you do this change. It's like you've got to understand the people's mindsets, and the fact that they care is the most important step. I mean, before I was vegan, I thought it was wrong to not be vegan, but I'd not made that step yet. Right. And so first of all, you've got to acknowledge the problem, and then you've got to acknowledge you're part of the problem. And so these people are acknowledging there's a problem. They're angry about it. They're angry very rightfully at the government and at these big companies, and then we just got to get them to look at their own actions as well. And I think if we look at it like a step by step, we're like 75% there. It's just over that final hurdle, hopefully, and then we'll have thousands of people occupying Westminster Bridge and Lambeth Bridge, all eating falafel and hummus. That's it. No, I really see the plant-based vegan movement is just the most incredible, beautiful thing, and I've been sort of watching all that happen for the last few years. And now you're seeing this like environmental movement, and at some point they're going to kind of clash into each other and form this big beautiful movement. I mean, it's already happening, and like that just gives me a lot of hope and joy. And it's just, as we said earlier, you can't
like leaders can't tell people what to do. You have to have the realization yourself. And I think that's anyone I talk to who's sort of passionately plant-based, it's like they came to that realization, you know, and then they became passionate about it. It never works. And I'm sure you've experienced it if you just tell someone they should be vegan, you know, in fact, they'll reject it. And it's the same with all of this stuff. So
exactly. So maybe if there's a school strike in your city, go along to it, or there's an Extinction Rebellion event or any environmental event, go along to it, partake in it genuinely, you know, be involved of it, but also use it as an opportunity to hand out some flyers or have a placard that, you know, promotes some veganism as well as, and then, you know, you can be a part of something that's really important, but also not feeling like you're involved in something that's, you know, hypocritical as well. So yeah, use what's happening with the environment and the environmental movement to you know, to also save our own hides, but also to look after animals and promote that aspect of it as well. Yeah,
definitely. And just to add to that, I say to lots of people is like, it's kind of amazing, veganism. I mean, it's the single biggest thing you can do to cut down your carbon emissions. It's also the easiest thing you do. You through it 3 times a day we choose to eat, and you can simply choose not to eat animal products, and it doesn't make your life worse in any way. And I think that's a mental thing we have to get over, you know, for the fear that eating vegetables will be less pleasing or whatever it is. But once you go down that journey, it really, you know, it makes you healthier. It's ethically, arguably, a better decision, and it's better for the environment too. So it's like a win-win situation.
Yeah, it ticks all the boxes.
Triple win. Yeah.
Triple win, everybody. All right, well, we'll leave it on that note. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Jack. I thoroughly appreciate it. I've enjoyed this discussion. I think it's a really important discussion to have, and I don't think that it's talked about enough often. So I'm very grateful for you coming on here and having this debate. What am I talking about? This conversation with me.
I joked to you when you first invited me on, because you publicised this as doing like debating with people you disagree with, and I joked to you that maybe we'd have a debate about our favourite type of tofu or something. So maybe that's where we might disagree, but otherwise we're sort of agreed. But no, dude, thanks for having me on. You know, I hugely appreciate you and your work and everything you do. So it's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, I appreciate that. Final question: what is your favourite type of tofu? Mine's the basil one. I love that one.
Oh, that one. Have you had the one with little olive bits in it?
No,
oh my God. That one with mushroom, hummus, pesto and avocado on a sandwich is
nice. There we go. So it's insightful discussion and recipes as well, guys. All right, well, thank you so much for listening to the podcast, everyone. I appreciate it very much. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and have a great week, and I'm sure we will speak soon. But until then, stay vegan if you are vegan, and if you're not and you've listened this far, well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much. And also look at how your actions impact the environment and the animals, and you know, and let's be more aware and more open about how we are responsible, as well as holding others accountable. Both important things to do. But until next time, thank you so much for listening, and we'll speak soon.